Hello, and welcome to this 8th video in a series on reflections on the Bhagavad Gita, specifically for this series, chapter 16, verses 1 through 3, also known as the godly qualities. And if you haven't already, take a look at the video marked introduction. That should be the first one in the list on the YouTube list of videos here. It will give you some background as to method and what's being done here, and it gives you a good start. And I also don't have to repeat all that information at the start of each of these videos. And at least what I've been finding and what I'm suggesting is also to take the videos in order. They're marked, 1, 2, 3, 4. Didn't have to think much about that. So now, if you have been following along, you know that the first item of business is to stop all the other business that's been going on during the daytime. We find ourselves running from place to place, usually very frantically. And if any of you have already seen some of these videos, you know that this is not, we're not going to be putting special effects and dancing all over the place. It is literally just talk about what I've seen in reflection. So they're pretty calming of themselves, but the suggestion is always not to let every activity kind of pile up, like a crash in the snow on the interstate, so that everything is not just piling one on top of another. And to do that, I use an exercise given by the School of Practical Philosophy in New York City. These days, there's any number of apps that will lead you to, guided rest. For that, really, the only thing to do here is to let's just come to rest. As I say, eyes open or eyes closed, it doesn't matter. Usually suggested with eyes closed to help a bit of the stuff that we're seeing here and there. So just be aware of the body here. Be aware of the thoughts as they go by. And just let everything go. Nothing to do. Nowhere to go. Oh, good. It'll be interesting to see. I keep my microphone right about here, just so that we get a little bit of clarity of speech. I happen to be the office next to mine over here, but as I do on occasion, plays music. So it'll be interesting to see why we were just coming to rest there, because all I heard was listen to the music. Well, speaking of listening here, we are in the second line of the first verse. We last talked about worship and devotion, and that was yajna, worship, and it had a cha after it. And since we've learned so much about anding in Sanskrit, this is just a plain and, as we've said before, apples and oranges, bacon and eggs. So the line as it reads is worship and the next word is swadhyaya. Okay, and translated, and again, I always point out the version of the Gita that I'm using. This is the version with Shankaracharya's commentary in it, and you can look up Adi Shankaracharya out on the internet and see. I think he was around 800 A.D. Easier for to read an article or two, but one of the things that he did in his kind of cleaning up the state of India at that time, he added commentary to the Gita, to the Upanishads, and that's a bit of what's in here. So when I read the Sanskrit, as I've mentioned before, is unchanged. What changes is either the commentary, whether it's Shankara's or a more modern person. What changes is both the commentary and the translation of the words, and that's why it's really important when we look at this to kind of dive into them in detail, not only the translation, in this case study of one's own scriptures, but really what's behind all of that, because if one is going to reflect on these things, you need to do a deep dive. This is not a a drive-by, okay, yeah, we took a look at it, well, what's next, are we going for ice cream later, that type of stuff. So as I've been doing, let's just go to the dictionary, as it were, and see what the definitions of swadhyaya are. So in the first one, it says reciting or repeating or rehearsing to oneself, repetition or recitation of the Veda in a low voice to oneself, and various other, repeating it, causing it to be repeated, but we get the general gist. The second definition is basically to study, recite, read to. Now, interestingly enough, and we'll have to see what comes of this as we start to talk, when we think of reciting stuff, we're thinking of what I'm doing right now, which is actually speaking out. And yet the root of the word for swadhyaya, and if you remember, it's this kind of introductory Sanskrit too, that each of the words has one or more roots. Where are they springing from? And the root of swadhyaya is shru. Probably could do that better, shru. And that is given as to hear, listen, attend to anything, give ear to, hear or learn anything about. So what kind of strikes me right off here is we're calling it a repeating or a study, but I think directionally. And I gave the example, probably last video or the one before, of, if you were brought up Catholic and went to confession, the priest, as a way of doing the cleansing, would give you the penance to be done. And it was usually, 10 of this prayer, 5 of that prayer. And again, I'm talking about when I was 8 or 9 years old here, but what tends to happen, and I see it in church even to this day, there's kind of a just of a rush to get through it. And I don't think that that's the direction that we're talking about here. So again, if you're an 8-year-old boy who can just confess their horrible sins of the week, you would just do what was said, 10 of this, 5 Hail Marys and what have you, and on your way. We're going in a different direction here, much the same way that I might even say that this video series is in fact that recitation, that repeating or rehearsing or repetition or recitation. The tricky part here for all of us is we all yap a lot, and the question is, are we hearing what we're saying? And I'm not just talking about the Gita or the Bible or Zen stories or Buddhist texts. I'm talking about, before we even get to the holier words, are we hearing what we're saying? How do we sound to the poor folks that have to put up with us day in and day out? What does that sound like? Okay, and if we can get that a little bit tuned up, then we get on to the possibility of reciting and hearing. So just taking that route of to hear or to listen really gives it gives direction both for the word that we're looking at, but also rather interesting direction as a way of handling life and a way of approaching other people. I mean, just think what we put our loved ones and friends through. We talk away, and somehow or another we don't listen, but we want the other person to listen. It's no wonder why people don't talk to us anymore. But that's isn't that what we do, right? And so the first place, the first place that the listening takes place is just to be fair to your fellow human beings on this planet, you need to listen to yourself. And once that happens, then there's a little bit more care as to what is said. You are not saying, just letting everything that's in the mind come running out and zipping out, what have you. Words count. Words mean things. Words have power. And so if you are, it's not even an if, we are constantly in a position as humans to be speaking to our fellow travelers on this planet. And so whether it's, at the level of reciting scripture or just, talking to your children or your spouse, I keep coming back to the why not? Why not have it be at a level that not only is pleasant and you would want to hear, but that you're not burdening them with something if you don't want to hear it, they don't want to hear it either. And like everything else that we've been looking at, that, again, it is pointing a direction. It is pointing a direction to care in speech. From care, we could get to love and compassion in speech. But if we are not listening to a thing that we say, I'm thinking of this series of joke books, one on family, one on love, men, women, what have you, and I think the joke was something like, "Yes, dear," is somewhat like Pavlov's dog. Yeah, somebody said something and go, "Yes, dear." Okay, yeah, whatever you say, and that's certainly not. And there may be times you may be running back and forth, out of the house. Okay, get that, yes, dear. But, fine, that happens. The question is, can there be times when we remember that we are talking to usually, so we say usually, a loved one? Can we remember that the level of speech for that needs to match the love that we say that we have for this person or that? Now, just getting back here to the actual words in this verse, why would it be of use to repeat some of these words to oneself? Well, I think we've mentioned before, especially in this modern age, we are just bombarded left, right, front, center, back, radio, TV, YouTube, Instagram, whatever it is. We have, you might as well be out in the asteroid belt with what's being hurled our way. And unfortunately, the sounds that are out there tend to be rather harsh, mostly coming from the point of view that there's no more important person in the world than me. That's me, 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 me. As I said, I keep mentioning the book because I just want to, you might as well plug while you can. Hasn't been published yet, but you might as well plug you can. And, at one point, the senior tempter says to the junior tempter, this is based upon the screw tape letters, I'm surprised the humans don't have "it's all about me" tattooed on every part of their body, because that is the way that we tend to go about our business. And so I hope the day comes that I don't have to keep saying "if" in front of these. If there is some value to not having everything be all about me, then we begin to understand what this particular verse is pointing us to. Because whether we're looking at Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, pick your religion. I am by no means an expert on the world's religions here, but at the heart of a religion that values humans, values the love between them, are going to be some series of words that have survived the ages, that have been written down precisely because they are considered useful. Where we are in the early 21st century, sad to say, is at a point where you first have to say, now, if this is considered useful. It's hard to say, and I know that, they always bring up the example of Socrates or Plato writing about the youth and the children, how terrible things they are, and this is about 300 BC, and people say, see, it hasn't changed. To some extent, this is true, but I do believe that our grandparents would be rather shocked at the things that are now considered negotiable or relative, and I don't have the exact list with me, but I had, in the course of this, started putting together a list of what are some of the key phrases that we find people saying all around us and that are kind of being taken in, because unless you do that your entire life, you have no choice but to hear the sounds around you, to hear what people are saying. So whether you're in the supermarket or department store or road rage, happening either to you or next to you, we are bombarded with some rather harsh and hateful sounds these days. And it is not to say that loving and good sounds can't be found, but the balance seems to be a little bit more, a little bit more to, boy, is everybody really mad. And so one of the reasons some of these texts have survived through the millennia and are passed down and are valued, and that's really the heart of the matter here, is that they are valued because they are valued for us as human beings. And so whichever, and I'll get to the study of one's own. Again, I'm starting here with the Gita. I could easily have started with the Bible or something else. But whatever the wording is, the first acknowledgement needs to be that it has survived this long and been handed down much like a family treasure, except it's the family of the world. Instead of handing down your kids, your china or the family gold and silver, what have you, you are being handed down what is part of human existence, and if you will, the keys to love. And we talked about truthful, honest, and wise right at the beginning. So when the particular verse that we're looking at is talking about reciting or repeating these verses, its first use is to counter what it is that we're either hearing out there or reciting in our heads. And really what we're saying and what the importance is that each of us have any number of things that run in from the heart, in our minds, and of course out our mouths. And you don't even have to do the exam. Just ask anybody who's around you. They can tell you what those things are, because it's either the things you say all the time or your attitude or what have you. Again, usually your spouse or your children bear the brunt of what your stuff is. We'll keep it clean here, okay? And they'll be happy to tell you what your sounds are. The purpose of this, the purpose of reciting it, is to kind of have a little bit of a course change here. Can you supplant one sound with the other? And the answer to that is, of course, yes, but only if you think that it is of more use than the sound that you're already running around with. There's just so many of them out there. I think the one that's always on the top of the list, it's not like it comes up all the time in the comments, whether Fox News or whoever or whatever you're reading on the internet always leaves room for comments. And right now it's a rather nasty place out there. But the tone of it basically is what gets reduced down to who's to say what's right and what's wrong. Very, very, very prevalent sound right now. Second on that list, I think, is who are you to tell me what to do, and you can fill in the rest from there. And what you have to acknowledge for these, I mean, I or anybody else can do 100,000 videos on this, but it that's just me or somebody putting out another YouTube video. What you really need to ask yourself is there anything of value here that I might say, maybe I'd like to take a look. And this, again, is why it's called Reflections, because in looking at whatever the verses may be, it allows you that time to look and say, am I acting horribly mechanically? I might just as well get a wind-up toy and stick that, in the house, and or a parrot. Can I, in fact, speak from the moment? Okay, and my suggestion is that in having something else to look at other than the comments on the internet boards or what you hear people yelling at each other, while you're out and about, if you desire something different than that, I certainly think that there's plenty available. You don't have to, again, I'm probably one of hundreds of YouTube videos out there saying the same thing. And I do think it is necessary, given the harshness and the kind of me-centeredness of just about every sound that's out there. And again, it's not like we do not get examples of people giving generously or caring for others. But that ship needs to stay afloat, and it needs a bit of help. And so the suggestion is that here you have kind of words that have stood the test of time. Why not take advantage of them? Now, the only other thing I want, before we take our pause, our break here, it doesn't appear in this particular translation, and again, this is straight from the dictionary, and there's various translations, but somewhere along the line, I mean, certainly Shankara is saying it in his commentary. Why would you keep the study to your own scriptures? And I'm going to venture forth here a couple of guesses. First off, it's generally going to be, for most people, what they were brought up in. And so you have kind of a lifetime of experience hearing a certain sound. And to take the jump, whichever direction, from, let's say, Western to Eastern, it's certainly doable. I mean, here I am sitting, reading these to you. But there's a certain amount of your inner being that was put together from whatever tradition you were brought up in. And I want to look at that a little bit more. As I said, I don't really have an answer to it. I just, kind of the gut feeling here is it's probably not where you want to start out. And certainly, and of course this depends on whether or not you are not stuck in a particular belief system. And so if, for example, I came from Christianity and my view was Jesus or nothing, well, you're certainly A, not going to be reading other scriptures, and B, you probably wouldn't be open to it anyway. So the suggestion is that if you want to help put in another sound, do it from what you're familiar with, what you're comfortable with, what resonates with your heart. Now, of course, you would eventually get to the point where if it is in fact, a religion or sayings that are universal in nature, yes, it wouldn't matter. But most of us are not flexible enough in mind, and certainly not in heart, to do that kind of, yes, the beginning of the Isha Upanishad is exactly the beginning of John in the New Testament. And when that time comes and those things you are seen, well, they're wonderful and they're nice, but if you can read it through John, fine. If you're reading the Isha, fine. But the important point is not to get stuck in the differences, but it is to kind of bring that other sound in. So if Krishna is saying something, if Jesus is saying something, if the Buddha is saying something, if only one of those appeals to you, well, fine. I am not here to say go that way, this way, or that way. What I am suggesting is that the power of love, the power of care for our fellow human beings, should be coming through in those words. And if they're not, if you find yourself, as it were, disliking your fellow human beings more and more, you might want to check into some other book at the time. So I think, as we say, I think that's it for the start. Again, we're just touching on each of these and seeing what they bring up. We're just touching on them. But I do hope it gives you, not for me to just keep doing these, but for anybody who's watching this and who has the patience and who's not expecting the 5-minute version of any of this, it gives you a way of your own. See what happens. And what it brings up, and if it has any effect, and if you think it's useful. So as always, we take a little bit of break. I look over the stuff, I see what happens, and we'll be back for part 2 in a little bit. Welcome back to part 2 of this 8th video in this series. We are looking at, in Sanskrit, swadhyaya, repeating or reciting the verses of scripture to oneself, or repeating in a low voice, as it were, which oddly enough has as its root to hear or listen or attend. I think that when it says reciting in a low voice, I do believe that the intent is to recite. Now, Sanskrit has a certain lilt to it, and if you have looked at either some of the translations or the Sargent's version, which really breaks it down much more grammatically, a lot of times there's little sounds and bits to kind of make it very poetical. So I think for Sanskrit, or for, let's say, much the same way as I said that, in India, a house would probably not be without some sort of altar, nor would you start the morning without some sort of recitation of the prayers. Whatever I say here in the Sanskrit would probably be like me trying to say Norwegian. I mean, the people would not be able to understand it. If you go out to any of the other videos and listen to these prayers, they are sung or said at breakneck speed. The reason I don't is because I'm just not familiar enough with the language that I could read it that fast. And the other, I think that there's just certain sound combos that are not Western. So if you want, again, I always recommend, this is just one among many here, but, take a look at some of the other videos, listen, because you even if you just put it on repeat to hear these words, and as I said before, let them kind of wash in or wash out or wash through, that would be helpful. And that brings me to something that I was thinking of on the way over here. It's been in the back of my mind as I do eventually watch these all to see, okay, just, how bad are my presentation skills, or how good are they sometimes, but B, are any certain themes arising here? I mentioned one of them before, which is that we are surrounded by some, terrible sounds. I mean, there's just the amount of yelling and anger alone is enough to make you not want to go out of the house. But the other thing that kind of run through this a little bit is because the general population is not actually sure of what might be good, what might be bad, or as the real point is not what might be good, is what I was just saying. What might be good or bad is that doesn't seem to be the problem. The problem is to even acknowledge the existence that there are, in fact, some things better than others. And that's a tough nut to crack, because again, maybe 100 or 200 years ago, there wasn't as much question as this is right and this is wrong. Now, when you're in kind of this free-for-all state, I have to start almost every sentence with if, or possibly, or maybe, or what have you. But the other thing, and really what I'm getting to here, and we talked about it, with washing and cleansing, is this idea of brainwashing. If there's an elephant in the room, as we would say, it cracks. First of all, there's so many things to be said about this, but it cracks me up. I mean, I spent over 40 years in corporate America, and if you want a place where you're going to be brainwashed, corporate America is it, okay? But in a more serious note on this, what tends to happen when anybody either presents some of these things or says, well, why not why not be good, or why not be kind, or why not be truthful? Somehow or another in the back of people's mind is this idea is I don't want to be brainwashed. Now, I have had that experience kind of throughout my life. It was a very big concern, at least of my father, that the right ideas were getting in so that we didn't have the possibility of being brainwashed. Now, what that might mean to any one particular person, I don't know. But there seems to be the idea running around that I will somehow or another lose. Now, I certainly consider, the terrible tragedies that the what might be called the cult figures had. The phrase "drinking the Kool-Aid" is from a terrible, terrible incident where, and I kind of forget who. There was another group. I think they thought the spacemen were coming back for them on the Ohio to kill themselves. And I think that, guys, if there's a hallmark and you've got to, drink the Kool-Aid or kill yourselves or what have you, I would recommend you look again and certainly leave that. Okay, we're not talking though about that, and yet somehow or another the idea of good, of right and wrong, seem to have fallen into that kind of, you're brainwashing me into being good, and as I've said before, the sounds that come out now are this kind of sound of, you don't know what the real world is like. If the real world is, a bunch of people killing each other, stealing from each other, shouting hateful things at each other, if that is what you are seeing, then maybe a little cleaning up might be in order. And there's kind of two really good versions that I've heard about that. One is kind of going back to corporate America, and you can go out there and look at Gangaji's YouTube videos, and in one of them, it was one of the greatest lines, and she says, we're all worried about being brainwashed, and she, with her beautiful smile, says, too late, it's already happened. Because from the moment that we're born, we're told all sorts of things about our existence here. And so here we are, told we're male, female, born, gonna die, this, that, and a whole bunch of other things. You're this years old. Again, she does it much better. But I don't really think that that's what what people are afraid of. I'm going to go with the second part, and I have, as I said before, been very fortunate in the people who I have met along the way in this life. And the school that I mentioned at the beginning at one point had as the leader, this was for New York, probably one of the most remarkable ladies on the planet you've never heard of. She had long since retired, what have you. And at something like a school, or even in reading this, there is always running through this this idea of, I don't know how, somehow or another, wanting to be good, wanting to be truthful, wanting to be wise is somehow or another cultish, which, okay, I'm not sure. This is where we used to say at work, you just connect the dots for me, please. But let's just say that somehow or another a thought is out there, and a rather strong thought that people pick up, that somehow or another equates goodness with brainwashing. And our lovely, and her name was Joy, her first name was Joy, and probably the most aptly named lady around. And she said, well, yes, I hear a lot about that, and, certainly something that the school is accused of quite a bit. And she says, but if, depends on what you mean by brainwashing. She says, if I could take the brain out of my head and give it to somebody like Jesus for him to wash it, and then have it given back to me cleansed and pure, then she says, well, I'm all for that. And I think that that's probably a better way to point us back to purity of being, which we talked about a few videos ago, and probably a way, not that I think that anybody is called upon to have to defend themselves in that way, but I think we tend to hide our good works a bit, where in a complete backwards reversal, we are somewhat ashamed of being good. As if somehow or another, again, that, our brains have been washed. And to that I say, for the quote that we were given there, well, maybe that's time to get out there and say, yes, that's actually a good thing, people. Where we are we're still in July 2020. And I got to tell you, I am totally amused when I go into the local stores and stuff, because everybody's out there with the spray bottles, and they're cleaning this and cleaning that, and it is necessary. Don't get me wrong, it's necessary. But people, you're at the wrong end of the stick, okay? Clean the mind first, clean the heart, and you still have to clean. You still have to clean. They're going to be out there with the Lysol, whatever the approved stuff is. But cleaning the physical world is, while necessary, not going to change anything. It changes from within. I've talked about the levels of creation before. Probably still have an opportunity to do that. But it changes from within. It changes from the heart. I'll jump right back to the Western Christianity. It's not what goes into a man that defileth him, it's what comes out Okay, talking about what are you holding in your heart, what are you holding in your mind, what are you spewing out every day. And I think we've kind of come full circle in this video on that, because that's how we talked about this. So in reflecting upon reciting or repeating or hearing whatever your particular scriptures are, as a useful thing to do for a human on this planet, I'm going to go with Miss Dillingham. Her name was Joy Dillingham. I'm going to go with Miss Dillingham and say I'm all for it. Okay, let's care for each other, and that care starts in how do we speak to one another, and that's the benefit of reciting or hearing the words of the great teachers who have come on this planet. Whatever you may think, and again, this is not to get into Scripture 101 or this versus that. Take it from where you are. Take it from what you have learned. Take it from who have inspired you throughout your life. And if there are good words there, well, let them wash over. Let them flow over and let them do their work. So I think that's about all on the subject right now. Again, I keep saying, these are only introductory. We may have a chance to look at some more, but right now they are introductory. And as we're apparently getting as our sign-off phrase, and just remember, if you're not enjoying this, there's plenty of cat videos out on the internet. So until next time.